Bridget, should we start by talking about this piece you wrote for The Spectator recently about divorce, which went kind of viral.
Very viral.
Me trying to stay off Twitter, even I saw this cross my feed several times. So what case did you make in your piece, first off, for those who haven't read it?
I mean, I really just said that divorce shouldn't be treated so lightly. Like I told the story of being a child of divorce and what it did to me. My husband also comes from divorce. And I was saying it was the moment that both of us, like our lives kind of changed as kids. We were straight A students. We met in recovery. And so long history with drugs after that. I mean, I was a very good kid. I was the oldest of 5, and I am the oldest of 5 still. And I was just that kind of type A personality, very good kid. And then my parents got divorced and things changed. And I was saying that it should be, I mean, it's, safe, legal, and rare. Like it just shouldn't be the default. I'm in a loveless marriage. Let's get out. And that was really it. I think that people lie to themselves about how hard it is on the kids. There's this lie, kids are resilient, they'll be fine. And my mentions were it was heartbreaking reading the initial flood of comments that came in. Because whenever you put this was very similar to what happened with my I Regret Being a Slut piece, which your book inspired. A piece I had been working on before for years, even before your book came out. And I had never been able to really put a frame around it until you so beautifully articulated in your book what I was trying to express just in a personal essay. And it was the similar thing where first you get the flood of people who feel seen and heard and validated and, oh, thank you so much. This was my experience. This brought up so many emotions of my own. And then you get the backlash and the people misinterpreting you and taking it out of context and the coping and all the other stuff. But the initial wave is usually, and I think the thing that causes pieces like this to go viral is just the people who are saying, this was my experience. Thank you.
What was really fresh about your piece is you spoke about the effect it has on adult children, right? Because it's not so uncommon to hear people point out that divorce does harm to children when they are still children. And it's fairly common for people to wait until children have left home, for instance, before breaking up, if they're in this kind of marriage that's, I love safe, legal, and rare, by the way. That's, that's also my position, right? I mean, and it's so difficult because basically what you want to say, but what you want the rule to be is get divorced if you have a really good reason, right? But the problem is that people have to assess for themselves what constitutes a really good reason. And lots of people, when they're experiencing any kind of dissatisfaction, unhappiness, conflict, whatever, there's going to be some concept creep. There's going to be a tendency to want to, exaggerate how impossible it is for you to stay in this relationship, right? And the point you make so well is that, okay, fine, but this is going to be affecting your children
forever,
decades in the future.
Forever. And the thing that inspired this piece was that I had a child very late in life, and I never had to deal with, I've seen what my siblings have had to deal with in regards to this. When they got married, where to put the parents, some siblings didn't want to come to the weddings because of falling out with the parents, etc. And I actually never experienced it on my own as an adult with children. And so having a child and then seeing how suddenly everybody kind of wants a piece of this grandchild and yet still have issues of their own. The thing I didn't even mention in my piece, because, this is the other thing that's frustrating about a piece like this when it goes out. It was originally for the magazine. And so you get 800 words, and people were like, but what about this case? And what about this case? Like, sorry, I couldn't get into the nuance and intricacy of every individual situation in divorce in 800 words.
No one who writes for a living ever makes that complaint. Like anyone who's ever had to meet any deadline whatsoever realizes that you can't put everything in. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to say is my parents still aren't even over it. The adults don't really ever get over it, let alone what it does to your kids who have to deal with it forever and your grandkids. It also affects them forever. It will affect you. Even I know there are a lot of people who are like, my parents got divorced and I never even think about it, etc. Of course, I'm going to hear again, you can't cover the range of human experience in 800 words, but my parents, even though they've moved on, they were probably incompatible from the beginning. They both are in other relationships. I love my father and his girlfriend of, almost 30, probably 30 plus years at this point. And they're very compatible and very much in love. And I'm an adult. I moved on. I wasn't like, I'm still harboring all of this, anger and I'm some victim. It's just like, here's the reality. They still deal with it. They were dealing with it when their kids were adults. I think my mom probably has some regrets about it. I know it's my dad, I know, has some regrets about it too. Because he's seen how it affected his kids. I don't think it's just the kids who are in these situations dealing with this for the rest of your life.
Yeah, there's a line in your piece. It's something like, it's 30 years on and I'm still managing these boomers' emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Or something like that, right? Which, yeah, that seems to be a very, very major part of the long-standing dissatisfaction that comes from being an adult child of divorce, where you're having to manage these. It flips the relationship and forces the child, even as an adult, to suppress their own unhappiness and desire to make a fuss, and basically forces the child to behave like the parent, to behave like the mature adult in the situation.
And often you're put in the position now of being the buddy. So I remember helping my mom get ready for dates and hearing about her dates. And I remember, people are like, well, these are just bad parents. Again, I know people who have had parents get divorced. They've had great, loving parents who managed to do this decoupling in a way that was healthy, and some of it is the people and the commitment to the children, etc. But the overwhelming majority of if you're getting divorced, it's usually because there's some kind of animosity that exists between you and your spouse. Most people aren't having a loving decoupling. They're getting divorced because there is something going on in the marriage. And there's a lot of resentment, particularly in those early years. And there's a lot, as those things shake out, a lot of people in my mentions and things I've heard and emailed and DM'd and friends who have read the piece have said to me, well, I wished my parents got divorced. Okay. That's an easy thing to say if your parents were never divorced. You didn't have to split. Just going from two households, if there isn't abuse and screaming and rage and you're dealing with that, just having to go, like, as the kind of youth would say, code switching, you're constantly code switching as a child when you're going from one household to another. And you never really know after you've been with one parent what you're going to get when you're with the other parent, because you don't have the consistency of just dealing with the adults and whatever might be going on in their life. You're just entering their life with wherever they are. Maybe they're feeling great. Maybe they're stressed out about something, but you don't have the benefit of being kind of a part of that wave. You're just entering into the wave aside from whatever fights they're having about your custody. I mean, children have had to take the stand in custody hearings against one parent or another. They've had parents talking about how much they hate the other parent, which is impossibly hard to understand how that affects you as a kid because you're half that other parent. And it's not, I think it's very easy to say, I wish my parents had been divorced when you're not when you haven't been subjected to the cost of the practical cost alone of what that looks like. Just going from one house to another. Some kids go every other week. Some kids go, it's insane. You might live close by, but then you're walking from one house to another. We, in our instance, moved far away, so only saw my father twice a year. And for summer, maybe you're doing summers with one parent. It's just logistically, it is a nightmare. It's an extra nightmare. And it's very hard for kids because you're pretty much always moving.
Yeah, as the kids, you have to have two toothbrushes, almost always, not the adults. I read an interview recently with a couple who, the newspapers and magazines are just obsessed with this. I don't know, maybe it's just the ones I read, but you so often get these profiles about people who've divorced, normally told from the woman's perspective, normally featuring a picture of her ex looking really hangdog, and I don't think I've ever read yours. Is like the first account that I have read that I can think of in a mainstream magazine or newspaper which tells it from the adult child's perspective, but you get it all the time from particularly the woman's perspective. And I read one recently which was quite interesting, where it was a couple who had still school-age children, and what they decided to do was to keep the family home, and then
I've heard about
bought
this.
a flat. Yeah, I think they call it nesting.
Yeah,
right. And then the parents swap in and out. And you think, okay, good. I mean, it means that the kids are not doing the travel. It means they don't have to have two toothbrushes. It means, all the sort of practical
that is
burdens.
so weird, though.
Well, but the thing that I thought reading this was like, if you have a good enough relationship with one another that you can manage nesting, because that requires a lot of compromise and like logistical whatever. It requires a good relationship from the parents who are divorcing. Why not simply not divorce? Right? Like if your relationship is that functional, that to me seems like a very good indication that you don't actually have a good reason to split.
Yeah, you just want to sleep with other people? Is that like, why not just get a bang pad that you share instead? Why not just open up the relationship and do that? There's a lot of studies too that have looked into this, because people kind of, once again, were saying, oh, you don't know how bad it is for kids. Why don't they do studies about people who have to live with people who shouldn't have stayed together? And it's like, they have done these studies. They're intramarital conflict studies. They do exist. And they find that, yes, if there's abuse, even yelling at each other and screaming and fighting, that's abusive. You shouldn't be in a relationship where you're screaming at each other all the time. Better for the kids if you get divorced overall, whatever that means. If you can coexist, but it's loveless, but you can still peacefully coexist, or whatever like what you just described, you get along well enough that you can nest, it's better to stay together for the kids. And so many people will say staying together is worse. Staying together in my instance, because the coping women came out in my mentions in droves. And it was often them saying, well, I know that this staying together was worse. And I don't think we're just talking about, abuse or drug addiction or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, worse for whom? Worse for you or worse for your children? Because I feel like this is still about you. And that was just my point. Like, okay, get divorced, but don't lie to yourself about how bad it is, how long it affects your kids. I mean, the stories that people were telling me, and this is the other heartbreaking thing, is just not knowing where their father was buried because they had a bad relationship with their stepmother, and then they never got to know when their father died or where he was buried, was one story I heard. And you hear a lot of this kind of, once the father gets remarried, there's a almost detachment because the stepmoms are jealous or insecure, or they start a new family, etc. With stepfathers, it's, I heard a lot of, my stepfather was great. Okay, again, you've clearly never read about the Cinderella effect or heard of this, because statistically, that's not the case. Actually, the minute you get divorced, as you cover in your book, you cover it in your book, right? The Cinderella effect. Okay. I was like, am I thinking of something you wrote that was after your book? How much abuse goes up exponentially the minute a non-biological parent is introduced into the home.
Yeah.
And
factor of 100 is what's estimated.
Crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. And then you heard people whose parents, because I think, and I could be wrong, but I feel like I read somewhere recently that boomers are the only generation where the divorce rate is increased. Like it continues to go up because these people are on their third and fourth marriages.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon at all. And that was something I really just didn't take into consideration, was how you manage it. And I think a lot of people have to a lot of the people were saying, I just say, here's what we're doing. You can partake or not. If you guys can't work it out, that's your problem. You made this decision, which I think is the healthy thing to do, but it's still unfortunate. And then not to mention kind of what happens, I think a lot about how there's this kind of pot that everybody's money is going into, and then that gets split up. And I know I saw people were like, oh wow, this is such a like white person problem, you're not getting your inheritance. And it's like, this is true for everyone. The minute you split households, everyone is generally worse off. You have a mom who's essentially a single mom now. You have unless they get remarried, and then we have the Cinderella effect to take into consideration. You have a father who's now has to pay for essentially two households. It's not like you're diminishing the not just emotional but actual physical resources that the kids have available to them. Like, again, sorry, this is just facts. It's not like, I'm sorry that this is offensive to people. It's always wild to me the way it gets you get so projected on, and when you write something like that, thank God I'm married to a therapist, because he's looking at all the comments going, this is all projection. This is not about you. This is people with unresolved guilt and shame and feelings, and they're putting it on you because you express this, but it's not. He's like, this is all about them.
What was the most common like type of comment, and who was making it? Did you get more women than men who were angry with you?
It was interesting. The men, I don't think men fare well in divorce in general, and they are a lot angrier about the circumstances, because it is often divorce generally favored. You have to basically be like a crackhead to lose custody of your child as a woman. The laws are just more favorable to women in general. And I think men, there is this idea, men kind of understand the financial cost of divorce better than women a lot of the time, only because often, I don't know how true this is now, as women have started making more money and oftentimes are the breadwinners, but there's that expression, it's cheaper to keep her, for a reason. So I think men are willing to hang in there, even if they don't see their part in, why the marriage might be failing. They're willing to hang in there longer because they also have a better sense of the actual cost to the family, not just the emotional cost. So there seemed to be, the most common comment was people agreeing with me. I think it was just people, the most common comment I got were children of divorce telling their story, which was heartbreaking. The most common, and this is another different thing I've noticed about kind of new Twitter, is most of the people who agree with you, or most of the people who are commenting on this, who are kind of saying, thank you for seeing me, I felt so much of this, are in your comments. Quote tweets, different story. Quote tweets,
that's where the aggression lives.
That's usually where the anger at your expression comes. Yes.
Yeah.
And that felt mostly like a lot of women telling me to grow up and get over it. And I was playing like a fun game where it was like child of divorce or divorcee. And it was usually the ones who came after me the hardest. You know, they would end up then talking about their own divorce. And so there was a lot of women kind of what I would say coping in my mentions or wrestling with what I brought up in juxtaposition to their decision to get divorced. And again, I don't like people can do whatever they want. You are the person who that was another common one. You're a busybody. Like, why are you telling everyone what to do? And it's like nowhere. That's the thing. Again, great having a therapist husband because I can handle backlash, pushback. All of that is part of, and even what I'm about to say is part of it too, but it drives me the most crazy is when I'm misrepresented. It's like, oh, well, I guess you should just stay with a psycho. Like nowhere in this piece do I recommend that you stay with a psycho. No, in fact, I say other than in cases of abuse, like there is a line in there.
Was the piece paywalled?
No.
Oh, so no excuses.
No excuses.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, it is the most, yeah. I think no one who's ever written for a living has ever criticized someone for not including something with a tight deadline, one. And two, has ever criticized someone for a headline that doesn't really represent the piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you were very careful. You mostly just talking about yourself. It wasn't like I am so much more of a like scold than you are.
Well, even in the piece, I was careful because people were like, oh, this is just airing dirty laundry. I'm like, this was airing like a dirty sock. If you think I'm airing dirty laundry, I have a pile of it that I could sell you. I brush over in very broad strokes all of the dirty laundry I could have aired because I don't want to do that. And I'm in recovery. I've made a lot of, peace with my parents as to things that have happened. And I do feel like, again, I have had the benefit of seeing both sides of this situation. I think my mother and father should have tried harder to stay together for their 5 children who were under the age of 12 when they got divorced. They went to one therapy session and basically decided it was over. And I still, they fought, but they weren't fighting. They weren't fighting in front of us. We moved a lot because of my dad's job, but it wasn't like, as I would come to learn the hard way, insane and dysfunctional and toxic and abusive. It was just 2 people who seemed like they had some stuff they needed to work through. And then they were both kind of out immediately. It wasn't even, I just don't feel like either one of them really fought for the marriage. Now, my mom might have a different story about that because who knows what her experience was leading up to getting the divorce. But neither one of them, he didn't seem to fight too hard when she said she wanted a divorce either. So I put it kind of on both of them. And then she got remarried, and I know the Cinderella effect intimately and didn't leave. So I do know what it's like when you're living with a parent who's in a relationship and they should get out. I also know exactly what that's like, painfully. And I don't think that's another thing, I don't know that I'll ever be able to tell that whole story, or at least not for many years. And if ever.
This episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth, the source for all of your bedding, bath, and loungewear needs. Cozy Earth sell all sorts of products: duvets, temperature-regulated sheets, towels, men's and women's clothes of all kinds, PJs, knitwear, socks, sweatshirts, super high quality, really luxurious, fantastic source of wedding gifts. My husband has one of their bamboo quarter-zip sweatshirts, described as ultra soft. It really is ultra soft. He's one of the fussiest people I've ever come across when it comes to finding clothes uncomfortable and itchy, and he absolutely loves this sweatshirt. listeners can get a special discount of 40% if you go to cozyearth.com/maiden or use the code COZYMMM. That's COZYMMM. Again, 40% off. That's a really good discount. And please, if you're asked in the post-purchase survey, do let them know that you heard about Cozy Earth from this podcast. Transform your home into a sanctuary with Cozy Earth.
It adds to the frustration of people kind of I think that's when my husband was like, okay, what about this misrepresentation in particular that you should stay in a household that's abusive is bothersome to you? And it's that I lived in a household that was abusive and my mom should have gotten out of that marriage and didn't. So I know what that's like. I can't say that in the comments, and I'm not about to engage every single person on it, but he was right to be like, okay, what is this bringing up in you that is making you so frustrated with this? So I don't know. I like these pieces. It's just always it's always so wild what hits. It's like I was saying, I said, magazine deadlines are a month in advance, as you know. And because I'm a writer and a notorious procrastinator, I am always brushing up to the very last second of my deadline. And I've been tossing this piece around for a while, but then there were a couple of things that happened in my life that really inspired me to write it. I sat down and it poured out of me, probably easier and faster than anything I've ever written, maybe in my life. And I was like, whoa, I could have written a book about that. And there is still, it's probably the thing I had to deal with the most in sobriety, the resentment. You deal a lot with in recovery with like what your resentments are. And the resentment of the lost potential, what could have been, the years I lost, that's still very real and visceral and painful even when I think about it. Doesn't mean I'm sitting around all day feeling bad for myself about this. It's just something that when it comes up, I'm like, and it came out, that poured out of me. I filed it. I forgot about it. And then they posted it. And I just do my little duty of, okay, I'm going to share it. Mind you, we have UK elections, French elections, which are going out across, not that Americans care or pay attention to that stuff, but it's still, there's a lot going on globally. And whether a president that we don't even know if he's going to run for president again. In the news cycle, I have had a 5-year column with Spectator and nothing's ever gone viral other than a piece about Sydney Sweeney's boobs. And it was a slow news week. And we had a holiday. So he posted it. I posted it and I was like, whatever. And then it was just like exploded. So I'm like, you guys, why would someone's like, you said you framed this as talking about divorce. This is how it was framed. And because you said I wrote about divorce, not I wrote about my experience. I'm like, why would I think twice about posting this? I've done this hundreds of times. It's just so like weird, the things people just all of a sudden like hold you responsible for.
I guess the thing is that the thing that virality reveals is how many people are affected by this one way or another. We know the divorce statistics on paper, right? We know that there's been this huge upsurge, but just sort of thinking about the sheer numbers of people who have some kind of painful experience of this on both sides, the children of divorce and also the divorcees themselves, and the people, like you say, who've experienced both sides, have experienced households where there should have been a divorce and experienced households where there shouldn't. It's just like, for so many readers, it's going to be painful in one way or another. And as you say, most of the responses, also bearing in mind the people who respond are like a weird minority.
Yeah.
Most of the responses are people being like, yeah, she's right.
Yeah. A lot of people were like, this is more of a commentary on boomers. No, it's not, because there's a whole wave of people getting divorced right now that I know. And they are, one of the things that inspired this piece was a relative's wife. They got divorced and she was on, because we were, in-laws, basically cousin-in-laws. She was on Instagram posting about her divorce party and like, my girls got me champagne and a cake that had like happy D-Day. It was like, you have 2 children. and their world just got blown up, and you are just out here like, it's just, this isn't just there is this whole like, shout your abortion, shout your divorce, these things that everybody's just so flippant about. And I do, again, a lot of people were saying, my kids learned, this was my favorite one, my kids learned skills from the divorce that they wouldn't otherwise have. I'm like, maladaptive coping mechanisms aren't skills. I wanted to like put one of those like left-wing clapping, tweets. Maladaptive coping mechanisms aren't skills. Like, yeah, as my friend said the other day, so child soldiers have skills too that they learned. It doesn't
marketable ones. Yeah.
Doesn't mean that it's good.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, you mentioned that men are more kind of, obviously there is a whole, we know that statistically women initiate divorces more often than men. I always used to be kind of skeptical of those figures because the only thing you can really measure is like who files the paperwork. Yeah. Exactly. And I sort of think maybe women are just more conscientious of just doing the paperwork more often than men. That doesn't necessarily mean, except that there is evidence that lesbians get divorced more than gay men, like quite a lot more, which maybe actually does suggest that women are more prone to initiate divorce than men are. I mean, it's sort of like, say you've got a man who's like a serial adulterer and then the wife initiates a divorce, like who's at fault there, right? I mean, it's difficult to pass. The impression I do get though, just from sort of social media and newspapers and so on, is that women tend to be more like shout my divorce and tend to employ more cope around it and are more likely to pretend it's great. Whereas I think men tend to just, unless they're super bitter and rail against their ex-wife all the time, they kind of just shut up about it, is my impression. Is that yours?
That was what happened in my experience of the divorce. My mom was much angrier and talked about my dad poorly. My dad never said a bad word about my mom. He easily could have, but he never did. And some of his siblings did, but she didn't really get along with them pre-divorce anyway. So I'm like, okay, well, you guys didn't like each other anyway. That was just anecdotally my own experience. There's something interesting too. I think that men are very slow to hear a woman when she's trying to tell him, we need help, we need marriage counseling, I'm not happy, this isn't working for me, something needs to change. And I think women actually will put up with that longer, but then once they it takes so long for a woman to kind of get to the place where she's done, that once she's done and the man is like, no, wait, but I love you, like, let's work this out, it's now too late because the woman's done, because it's taken her. And again, this has just been my experience knowing a lot of men who have ended up divorced even when they wanted to. Men who can do some self-reflection will say, she tried for a long time to get me to see that this marriage was failing, and by the time I saw it, it was too late. And I hear that a lot. So I do think for women, I kind of have a theory that it takes you, a woman, basically however long the marriage is, it started failing half that. So I think it takes a woman, like my parents were married 14 years, and I think they started having problems halfway through it. And it probably took my mom 7 years to really hit that point where she just said she couldn't do it anymore. And again, look, we moved every year and a half. I just moved with one child across the country. And I was like, holy shit, how did my mom do this every year and a half with 5 children? That is insane. So I have a lot of more compassion for her than I probably did. But on the other hand, having a child, I also am like, well, why? Like, why would you go through this and do all this and not try and stay and fight? But I don't think that they were thinking about us. I just don't. And then marry somebody. This was the other thing I heard that was so common. The line that really struck people was they start dating and you become basically the third wheel in both your parents' lives, because now they're like kids again and they're falling in love and they're in relationships and they're dating. And it's like, it's so weird. When I was a 13-year-old, like I remember, I have such vivid memories of helping my mom pick out an outfit for a date at this time when I don't know what that did to me as a young woman. And just hearing about her dates and how psycho this guy was that she ended up marrying. There were a lot of red flags. I was like, I'm 13, but that probably sounds like really bad, mom. You should probably stay away from this person.
There was an ad on the radio I heard the other day, and it took me a second to like realize what it was, but I can't remember what it's for. I'm not gonna offer the brand any endorsement here, right? It was so it's a radio ad, and you hear an older woman's voice say something about, "Oh, he's really sexy, isn't he?" And then a younger woman's voice is like, "Oh, mum, do you fancy him?" And the older woman's like, "Yeah." And anyway, and kind of the whole joke. And initially I thought, are they friends? Like, no. This is like a single mother with her adult daughter, and the adult daughter is being her like
dating coach.
Yeah, or what's the expression that men use? Her wingman. When she like sees some guy that she fancies, and then oh, she needs this product to like rail this hot guy or whatever. And it was just so, and I was really like, hang on, this is a really like weird dynamic that you're presenting to us through advertising as normal and typical, because advertising is supposed to present like everyone's lives. And I thought, well, I guess in a way, actually, given how many, I mean, I know the statistic is in London that half of children will reach the age of 15 no longer living with their biological father. Wow. I'm sure that I mean, that's in London, which may be worse, but not necessarily. I mean, we know that this is very common now, right? Right. So I guess, I mean, actually, it is not that unusual for basically children, hopefully adult children, to be put in the position of being expected to be kind of wingmen to their parents in their sexual adventures.
Yeah, I think about
it's not
the
good,
men. Though. No, I mean, there were a lot of men talking about their dads going on kind of like these benders with female, these like kind of running through different women. And most of the dads I know now who are divorced are pretty conscious of this. And I feel like it takes a long time before they'll introduce anybody to their child or children. But not everybody. I mean, I'm very libertarian in the sense that I'm not going to tell people, I don't like having to tell people what to do, but I am also very libertarian in the sense where it's like, okay, but take responsibility for the decisions you make. So there are consequences, evaluate the trade-offs of this, and don't lie to yourself. That's all I was saying. Just don't lie to yourself about how bad this is going to be. And it's not going to end when you guys get divorced. It actually kind of just begins. Now the divorce portion of your life begins, and it's, how are we doing Christmas? How are we doing Thanksgiving? Who gets some for the summer? Where is it? It's, if you don't get along, how it's like, who's coming to see you when after you have a child? It's so bonkers. It's just, I don't know. I feel my heart was really bleeding for a lot of it really was heartbreaking reading all the comments. In the same way that when I wrote that I regret being a slut piece, there were the comments, the stories, the things I was hearing from people, it was heartbreaking. But again, it's because I put these very heartbreaking things that happened to me. I mean, I'll never forget that "I love you, baby, wrong person" text message that I got as long as I live. Those moments that were so demoralizing.
Yeah, in that essay, yeah. That "I regret being a slut" essay got read out by Ben Shapiro. You remember?
Yeah, that was hilarious.
I think I sent you that link. I was like, "How does it feel?" Ben Shapiro reading out your It's really very funny. You read it like super deadpan.
I know, it was so weird. I ended up reading it myself because I'm like, I need this out in my voice because it can't be just Ben Shapiro with millions of views reading this.
Like
I mean, God bless him for reading it.
Yeah.
But it was very, I mean, that essay has almost 500,000 reads on my Substack, which is insane. It's crazy because that's just on my Substack. It was also Spectator took it, Ben Shapiro read it. It's like that thing, again, it struck some kind of weird nerve that, you know, ended up like your book kind of just captured this zeitgeist that was percolating. And I think,
I wish I'd sold
the
500,000 copies though. That would be cool.
You should have.
Point taken.
You should have. I mean, I figured you did.
Did you get negative pushback to that one?
Oh God, yeah. I still get it.
What did people say? What was the sort of most common
that I was
response?
rewriting my own history, that the way I was remembering things wasn't accurate, that again, I was trying to tell people
you'd been like more agentic than you were remembering.
That I enjoyed it more at the time, and now I regret it. It was like a, you know, now that I'm older and married and have a kid, like, oh yeah, marriage and kids will do that. But again, I was writing that essay before I was ever even engaged or in a relationship and had a kid. There were a lot of people who were saying, a lot of women who would argue that they were very happy sluts and that I was painting with a broad stroke, that, you know, these sexist tropes that women can't sleep around like men, which I still don't think they can. And I got a lot of pushback from it. I still hear from women in real life when I'm at these kind of IDW events or dissident dialogues or whatnot, that someone should write a piece like why I loved being a slut or whatever. I'm like, well, I don't think
there's no shortage of those.
There's no shortage of those. Exactly.
There are like entire publications devoted to that genre.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I did write for Playboy, and in that time I was in my life, I was doing a lot of it was right when the poly thing started percolating. And so I was trying to see what that was all about. And often, because I was just single and out there, I'd use myself as an experiment. And I was kind of the third in an open marriage. And I remember talking to my sister, and she's like, where do you go after that, after doing that? You know, it's like, well, either I go, I guess, into like the BDSM community, or I go into a boring monogamous relationship. You know, it's like, I think monogamy, because I'm not going in the other direction.
To do at this stage.
Yeah, it's so radical. It really, that experience made me want that. So people would accuse me of kind of using my sluttiness and then changing my mind and regretting it. You know, people are going to put, you know how it is. People are going to put all kinds of things on you when you're writing, and no one can really, particularly the kind of writing I do, which I don't mean to be. It's so weird because I've always been so insecure about the fact that it's always my kind of navel gaze. I remember I had an editor who was like, this is a little too navel gazing. And those pieces that I write are the ones that always go bonkers. And I've always felt insecure about that. I'm like, why can't I be like more like you or Mary Harrington, where I'm just more, I'm more incisive and able to, you know, look at things like a smart person and evaluate them and look at systems and studies and be like, actually, and it's just not me. It's just not, I don't know.
People love reading personal stuff, and publications know that, which is why they will often, I was going to ask actually about this, it's a tricky area, right? Because I read all this personal stuff. To some extent, I mine all these personal essays for my own detached analytic essays, right? And yeah, I mean, they're super readable. They're so compelling. Everyone loves reality TV. Everyone loves Jerry Springer, whatever, right?
Yeah, I think that's why I feel ashamed of it in a way of like, I'm just writing Jerry Springer like essays.
No, because there's a you are a much higher caliber than Jerry Springer, right? Because you have there's a beauty and poignancy, I think, to the way you write about it, which is why they go bananas.
Thank you.
It is a tricky kind of issue in terms of exploitation of writers, though, isn't it? Because you have enough of a name for yourself. You're writing for your own Substack. Like you have a more of a kind of, you're in a more powerful position as a writer. But there is definitely a phenomenon of, say, really young writers who want to get in the game and who will write about the most awful things they've ever experienced, or incredibly explicit sexual stuff. Like there's a column, I won't name her, but there's a columnist I read sometimes, and I'm kind of doing this, right? I'm giving her clicks, but she writes like a sex column, and she's quite young, and it's really obvious from reading her sex column that she's utterly miserable and she's constantly getting her heart broken, and she's having exactly the experiences that you describe in the I Regret Being a Slut essay. But she sort of has to keep having these experiences because otherwise she will lose her job, because the whole point of the column is that week in, week out, she's experiencing new things, having her heart broken in new, like, exciting ways. And that's a real pickle for her. And I do think, like, if I was her editor, I would feel very guilty about this. But there's a market.
Yeah.
Someone's going to,
That's the interesting thing. My editors have never pushed me to write any of that on my own. So
I get constantly pushed, can I say? I say no, always. Editors are outrageous often. I've been asked, like, please, like, provide a photo of your son to put in next to the article. Please talk about your own, but yeah, like, and I say no. But if I was more naive, younger, more desperate to get into the industry, I'm sure I'd say yes. The episode is not over. There is another maybe 30 minutes of content, but it is behind a paywall. If you would like access to that content, if you would like to show support for the show, paid subscriptions are what keep it on the road. Allow me to pay my producers, put food on the table, all that important stuff. The extended version of the podcast is available at my Substack, louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can also find, as I say every week, bonus episodes, extended episodes, the MMM chat community, all of this. Please sign up for a paid subscription. It makes such an enormous difference to my ability to keep producing the podcast and grow it even bigger, produce more episodes, all that good stuff. There are other ways that you can show your support for the show as well. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. You can like us on YouTube. You can tell your friends and family how much you like the show. If you find it valuable, all of these things make an enormous difference to our ability to keep making it. Thank you so much.